Are you a crappy partner, crappy wife, crappy husband, crappy mate? This podcast is for you. Give yourself the gift of self-awareness. Learn new skills. Take the time to assess your partnership, marriage, relationship, etc. So how are we going to do this? Start by taking the Crappy Mate quiz. The quiz can be found on our website, www.crappymate.com, on Pinterest, Crappy Mate, Instagram and Facebook, Crappy Mate Podcast. We will dedicate episodes to discussing the quiz topics. In further episodes, we will be exploring common problems, the speed bumps that occur in relationships. Also, we will introduce time-tested skills and helpful hints to enhance your relationship, and we invite you, our listeners, to contribute your thoughts, questions, or concerns regarding relationships. Welcome to the Crappy Mate Podcast. I'm Dr. Richard Vance Barnes, MD. I'm a board-certified general psychiatrist with 25 plus years in psychiatry. I have treated patients in a variety of settings, both inpatient units, outpatient units, partial hospitalization units, as well as detoxification programs and rehabilitation programs. And I've had a private practice for many, many years.
And I'm Barbara Quaid, a marriage and family therapist. I also have over 25 years experience working with families, individuals, and couples. And my life as a therapist has been both humbling and joyful. Before we get started, I'd just like to talk about our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy, and as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
The Crappy Mate podcast was developed out of hearing years and years of stories and accounts from patients in therapy about their mates and themselves actually being crappy mates and poorly behaving within the relationship. And so this concept was then developed into a podcast of how can we help people to actually improve upon their relationships.
And so in order to do this, we developed a quiz. And the quiz, we really thought about some concepts that we thought were important in a relationship. And so the Crappy Mate quiz ended up being a 10-question self-scoring assessment that can be found on our Facebook page. And our Facebook page is aptly named the Crappy Mate Podcast. And along with the quiz, you will find a glossary with the terms we used both in the podcast and on the quiz. And this is so we can all be on the same page. Now, to score the quiz, you will read each question carefully and then ask yourself, do I do this almost always, sometimes, or almost never? And when we thought about this, the scoring is like this. Almost always is worth 3 points. Sometimes 2 points. And almost never 1 point. So once you have your total points, you add them up. And a score of 10 to 17 clearly indicates that one needs improvement. A score of 17 to 24, one has a degree of awareness, but improvement can still be beneficial. And a score of 24 to 30, one is aware, insightful, and acting in a positive manner as it pertains to the relationship. Welcome to the Crappy Mate podcast. This is part 2 of living with a partner with ADHD. In our previous podcast, we described the signs and symptoms of ADHD. In today's episode, we will be talking about the impact of living with a partner, spouse, mate who lives with ADHD. So, Dr. B, can you give us a review of some of the symptoms and signs of ADHD?
Sure, Barbara. As we had discussed in our previous podcast, we talked about the signs and symptoms of ADD or ADHD, and as in the past, we'll be using those two terms synonymously, ADD and ADHD, or interchangeably. So when I mention to my patients and discuss with them, again, the signs and symptoms, I will often talk about how there is in the ADHD, ADD person that there is poor focus, that they will experience poor concentration. They will have a inability to finish tasks in most cases. They will be easily distracted or easily distractible. The person with ADD or ADHD will also have impulsivity. They'll be somewhat impulsive. And they may have poor organization skills and are poorly organized when it comes time to complete projects. And I also note that there is a hyperactivity element to this. And what we'll see quite often is restlessness in people or the fidgeting nature of people. They'll be tapping their fingers or their toes, that they often will be the pencil or pen end biters. They're chewing off the ends of their pens. And so we know that this condition and ADD or ADHD will last at least for 6 months. And most of the time, this is a lifetime condition.
So I'm just going to give you a little scenario. And in this case, this is a couple. He's a successful businessman. He's been married 3 times, and this is his 3rd marriage. He had difficulty working at a corporation, and then finally he decided he'd do better on his own, and he started his own business. He has 2 children from a previous marriage, but as his wife says, he's not consistent with seeing them or calling them or texting them. And he's frequently late for family obligations. He's not there for birthday parties, or he comes late. All of these things, which are really very frustrating for her. And they recently acquired a dog, and he's been inconsistent with the dog. In fact, not too long ago, he left the front gate open, which caused his wife a lot of frustration and anger because she was afraid for the safety of their dog. In their home, his side of the bedroom is a mess. It's littered with clothes and other items, and frequently his wife is frustrated and hurt. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yes, this is a typical case that I will see often that will be presented to me, and they're coming into treatment because all of these elements are generally in place, and they're causing problems, issues at work, issues with the relationships, issues being able to stay on task and complete projects. These are all what I will see quite often in my patients who are suffering from this condition. And so to me, if I'm a significant other, mate, partner, spouse, and I'm watching this, the first thing that comes to mind to help myself with living with this partner is I got to educate myself. I have to learn more about this disorder and get a much better understanding about the symptoms that are being displayed and the condition as a whole, how it is actually progressing as time is going on. So the first and foremost item that I would have people address would be education and understanding.
I agree with that. You find out what's going on with this person. And I think as you learn about the condition, I think you can develop more empathy and understanding. And I know that for you, Dr. B, this comes as a package. If you say that you love someone, you have to have the whole package, right?
That's absolutely right. And that's what I will challenge my patients on. Well, didn't you say you love this person? Didn't you profess your love to them? And what does that really mean? Well, that means a great deal, in my opinion, when you use those words, such as, I love you and I care deeply about you. Well, you got to prove that as well. And part of that is acquiring an understanding of whatever they're going through, whatever the condition is that they're experiencing. You want to know and learn about that. And there are just a wealth of resources to learn about ADD. I'm very big on the American Psychiatric Association's website for learning. I enjoy reading out of WebMD as well. And NAMI is another source. We've mentioned that in the past. National Alliance for Mentally Ill is a wealth of resources for both patients and for families. And so we're all familiar today with the internet, and there's so much research that can be done on the internet. So there's really honestly no excuses for not understanding your partner's condition more and for understanding it more. But once you understand that, then the empathy should really flow after that. So I always feel that with understanding and knowledge comes empathy and hopefully compassion. So that should follow once we've acquired and understand what we're really looking at.
I agree with all of that, Dr. B. But on the other hand, I am not going to be a doormat. And what I mean by that is we just don't want to go overboard and pick up all the pieces for our partner so that we're the ones picking up the kids and planning for all the events and being there on time and doing all the things, stepping in where they should be stepping in. Because that's not helpful either to your partner or to both of you as a couple.
So, Barbara, let me explore a little bit further with you. When you describe boundaries and establishing boundaries, what does that mean for you?
Well, for me, I use the expression, good fences build good neighbors. You build a nice fence between your property and your neighbor's property, and it keeps everything clear. We know that what belongs on one side belongs to them, and what's on the other side belongs to me. And having those good boundaries really tells us that we take care of ourselves, and we have expectations and rules for how we want things done. But with boundaries, we have to be careful that we verbalize them. So I'm going to give you a personal example. My husband is oftentimes late, and he's been late, I think, probably all of his life. He's kind of like I'll be there 5 minutes, 10 minutes after. I'm not like that. So years go by, and I'm frustrated. And then finally one day I said to myself, we have 2 cars. So I just sent him a text and said, okay, I'm heading off to this meeting that we have or this engagement that we have. I'll meet you there. What that tells me is I'm going to take care of myself and I'm going to let him take care of himself. I'm not going to be making excuses for him. I'm taking care of my side of the fence.
I think that's beautiful. Let me share with you, too, about just a personal account on the boundaries. And I think it's important to really have boundaries. And the thing that I want our listeners to know is that at times we have to reestablish the boundaries and we have to state them over again and sometimes again and again. But it is important because boundaries establish how we're going to be treated. So just a kind of a personal note as we discuss further boundaries in living with an ADD partner. So let me share with our listeners that my spouse and myself probably do suffer from some form of ADD or ADHD. Although I have not been formally diagnosed, I've known that I've had a difficult time staying focused during reading, keeping myself organized, and procrastination at times can wreak havoc on me completing tasks. So my spouse has established a boundary with me so that I don't misplace my items and lose things, which I'm prone to do. And perhaps that's another feature that helps me to identify that I do have some ADD, perhaps. She's established this boundary for when I come home. And what she's done is she has a container where my keys, my wallet, my phone, etc., all go directly into this container the moment I get home from work. And, by establishing these boundaries, what my spouse has done is she's actually helped me to be better at managing my condition by having this external boundary in place. So it's something that I think we can utilize, and that is, at times we might feel like boundaries restrict us, but actually in this situation, I would have to say that having a boundary in which I have to place my personal items into a container when I get home actually helps me greatly to stay managing my condition.
I like that you said that because really boundaries are for both sets of people. It's going to help the person who is setting the boundary to take care of themselves, but it's also, as you pointed out, it's helped you to manage some of your own impulses to just put stuff wherever. And I think with that, we always tend to focus on the negative. And I see this all the time. We focus on, you could do a million things right, but I'm going to notice the one thing wrong that you do. And I think when you live with a person with ADHD, the focus tends to be oftentimes, and this is a generalization definitely, but oftentimes on, the mistakes or the mess ups. And I think it's really important also to focus on the positives. And there are a number of positives that the ADHD person lives with. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree with that. And I think the positives are quite often, they're overlooked because we're dealing with things like clutter. We're dealing with things like forgetting appointments. We're dealing with things like driving in a car with someone who has ADD or ADHD at times can be quite challenging because that driver with the condition sometimes is irritable. And they're snapping at other people while they're driving because they don't have the patience to wait in traffic, or they're not quite as tolerant of some of the mistakes that they see on the road, so that they're yipping and they're yelling at people at times. And sometimes they're frankly part of the whole road rage reaction. So, but the positives of ADD or ADHD are sometimes overlooked. And one of the real positives, in my opinion, and what I've seen in practice, is that people can be quite creative and quite spontaneous with their ideas and their thought patterns. And so I think those are really some overlooked positives with this condition.
I think a lot of people with a lot of energy or with hyper focus, where they can focus on something, can be really good. They can be good entrepreneurs. They can be good artists. They have a number of talents that they can use. And so looking at the positives, and I would say energy, spontaneity, good communication skills, all of these are positives that I think come parcel with the ADHD diagnosis.
Barbara, we really want people to develop this empathy for their partners, right? And one of the ways that we have to do that is we got to practice. We have to be patient, but we have to practice. And we have to practice getting our minds to think in that way as well, because quite often when we're with someone who we see making a mess or forgetting things or creating clutter, we're apt to jump on that. We're apt to criticize that. But the other part to this is the empathy part, and it's not their fault. We have to really remember that, but we also have to practice thinking differently about what they're doing.
And that goes back to using our brain again and really turning off some things and turning on others, and turning on that ability to look at the positives, to look at the strengths, and to access our own patience in dealing with our partners. So I have a number of helpful hints today. And these helpful hints are living with a partner, mate, spouse who lives with ADD. Number one, educate yourself on ADHD, and especially adult ADHD. And as Dr. B pointed out, there are a number of sources online that you can really look to. Number two, create boundaries and keep these. And don't forget, you need to verbalize your boundaries. Unverbalized boundary is not a boundary. Number three, do not take your partner's ADD symptoms personally. They are not thinking about hurting you or frustrating you. Number four, keep a couple or family calendar. Have it somewhere where everybody can access it and put down all the important dates you need and meetings, etc. Number five, have daily logistic check-ins. Those are very, very simple. Just in the morning, you can just say, let me tell you what I'm doing today. What are you doing? When will you be home? And, oh yes, I have this other thing that needs to be done. And number six, focus on your partner's strengths. And all of us have strengths. So to focus on the strengths rather than on flaws is really, really important. And seven, when planning, have a plan A, a plan B, and maybe even a plan C. And number 8, be gentle with your partner, but definitely be gentle with yourself because it's complicated.
Thank you for that, Barbara. Those helpful hints are wonderful. And I think that if people are able to practice them, they will see improvements in their relationship as they are dealing with and loving their partner who is suffering from ADD. Now, one of the things that has happened, Barbara, is we've gotten some rather large flow back in terms of wanting to discuss and review. What is it like if I am that person, that partner, that spouse, that significant other, mate, who is actually suffering from ADD? How do I deal with myself and my condition? And how do I deal with helping my relationship to improve? So we're going to actually expand this series and do a third part on living with ADD, ADHD from the perspective of I am now the person with the condition. So thank you, listeners, for tuning in, and please stay tuned and listen to the third part of the Crappy Mate podcast on living with ADD as the person with the condition. Thank you. In closing the podcast today, I just want to remind our listeners of our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy. And as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
Thank you for listening to the Crappy Mate podcast. We invite you to submit comments, questions, and/or concerns about today's podcast, or give us feedback on relationship topics you'd like to hear covered. We encourage you to try our helpful hints. Give these a go, try them on for size. Remember, you can follow us on our Facebook and Instagram pages under the Crappy Mate podcast. Our website is www.crappymate.com. And please be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening.